What is up, everybody? Welcome to another Build a Mind podcast. I'm your host, Trevor, and I am joined today with my co-host, Will, and Melissa Sands, aka Mel. So Mel has a very interesting story about how she found Bitcoin, and I'm going to let her touch on that at the beginning of this episode and before we really dive into the mining meat of it. But before that, let me just kind of introduce her. So Mel was an early internet and eBay adopter, and after quitting her full-time job, she started selling online full-time in 1998. eBay had helped turn her into a reseller of antiques and vintage items. Her and her family are from Metro Detroit, and when the great financial crisis hit in 2007, they lost everything, from her antique shop to her husband's job. They decided to move to Chicago, where the opportunities were much more diverse, and that's when Mel began hosting her own in-person vintage event, Vintage Garage Chicago, in 2012. Some of you might be wondering, what does any of this have to do with Bitcoin mining? And we'll get into it, but I really want to hear Mel's story and what she came back from, because in 2008, 2007, a lot of people had very similar situations where they lost absolutely everything. But Mel has managed to come back from that stronger, more robust than ever, and we're going to let her tell that story. So I'm going to bring her up, and here she is. Welcome, Mel, to the Build a Mind podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you. So, Mel, in 2008, your family lost everything. And since then, you've managed to come back stronger, more robust than ever before. Can you tell me what that was like for you? How did that affect you and your family?
Well, it's interesting the way you put it, because it made me think for a second, wow, we really have come back from that. And I'm not sure, had I found Bitcoin, that we would have, if that makes sense. And we'd probably still be struggling, and it would still be, a bitch. But, when I heard about internet money and someone said, hey, but, there's this internet money. And I thought, well, that makes sense to me. I've sold online and I'm selling internationally, and what made the most sense to me about it was it could be used everywhere. We could cross borders with it, and it would be worth the same amount no matter what. And I had gone to Europe previously and had such a problem with exchanging and the money differences and all that. And I just thought, God, this makes so much sense. So I went ahead and bought $100 worth. In 2017, a friend of mine said, hey, have you heard about this Bitcoin thing? And I'm like, wait a minute, I've got some of that. So I go hunting and I find it, and my $100 was worth $4,700. And I went, what is this? What's it doing? And what's it going to do in the future? So everybody had said to me, oh, you've got to sell it. You've got to sell it. In my mind, it's $100. And it's the best spent $100 I ever spent, because it sent me down the rabbit hole. And because I had the online experience and I had been an early adopter, I could see it straight down the line. There's only been one other thing in my life, and that was selling online, that I could see 20 years from now, everything's going to be online. Everyone will be buying everything online. And that's how I felt in 98. And so for me to start selling online, I had no trouble with that. And so the only other thing that I've been able to see straight down the line is Bitcoin. And that the more I learned, the more I studied. Okay. I found Bitcoin Twitter. I started to look for people to listen to, which is one of my superpowers. I know how to get to the person who is going to give me the best information, and then that person's going to lead me to more information. So that person was Tone Bays. And I spent many, many months before finding him. I can't even tell you how I found him. But when I did, I began to stalk him in a nice way. And I suddenly was there. I was on his chat every single day. Pretty soon, I was a moderator. And like I said, he's never steered me wrong. And I've always appreciated his level-headed, views of Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency world and pretty much the world itself. He has his moments of getting annoyed by things, but at the end of the day, he always came back to that logic, and him and I, we have different political views. We always have. And what I love about him is that he accepts me and my views for what they are, and I also accept his for what they are. And because of that, I just couldn't be more appreciative. And so
I've known Tone a long time, and he's much like you described. But I think the cool thing in your kind of story there is like, this is, if anyone out there is wondering like, man, how do I crack into the Bitcoin space, or how do I get started trying to find work in the industry? One of the best ways is to do exactly what Mel just described. You just start volunteering. You just start hanging out where the players, however big or however small, where they're hanging out. And so Mel gave a great example. This works very well. I've seen it work for many, many, many people. You just start hanging out in the chat rooms, engaging in conversation, asking questions, trying to be helpful, and just participating in the community. And the more you do that, the more value you can add doing that. A moderator or administrator of that chat room is going to nominate you for some responsibility or some additional authority in that chat community circle, and off you go. That's going to open up many, many more doors. So if you're wondering how to get involved, Mel just told a great story, of exactly how to do that. And I love hearing Tone Vay's stories as well, because, I've known him for 10 years, and he is quite the character in our industry.
Great ones too.
I bet you do. I hope we can get into some. I see you've been very helpful with him and some of his events, and we could talk about that later in the show.
Listen, I owe him. I owe him my life. When I figured out Bitcoin, and in 2017, I started to do that research, I also realized I didn't know a damn thing about finance or money. I grew up in Metro Detroit. I did not grow up with money. And, when no one has any money, nobody talks about money. Mm-hmm. Just that simple.
I completely, I feel resonated with that because Scott Offord is the one that kind of runs this podcast as the producer. And I found Scott in a very similar way to you finding Tone. And I feel a very similar way. So, it makes sense, and I completely understand it. And I like how Will phrased it, for anybody who's really trying to get into the Bitcoin space, like that is one of the best ways to find the people that you really need to be around. So
it's still
invaluable to them. I showed up at BitBlock Boom 2 years ago, and I'm like, I'm here to help. And I just put my head down and I went to work. Now Gary Leland is one of my very best friends in the space. And, I just did what I said I was going to do and decided this has changed me so much that I'm going to contribute in any way I can. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
And it obviously it's working for you. You are hearing your story is really amazing, just because I feel like there's a lot of people out there that have gone through similar hard times. Nobody talks about money. My family never talked about money. Nobody ever taught me how to manage finances. And so it wasn't until understanding Bitcoin that I was like, oh, wait, there's actually a way to deal with money. There's a proper way and a wrong way. So,
Right.
Yeah,
but somehow with Bitcoin, and then just realizing how it worked, that made sense to me. And then it started to click how our monetary system does not make sense to me. And because of it, I just began to stack as hard as I could and learn as much as I could. And one of the rabbit holes that I've gone down is the mining world. And that was because I really wanted to, I wanted to know how it worked. I wanted to understand it so that I could explain it better to all of the people that do not want to hear what I have to say about it. But I figured at some point, somebody is going to ask, how does this happen? And what is mining? And how does that work? And so I got into that. Tone also got into that right after I did for his own reasons, which I can also explain because they're very similar to mine. And so I just think this is I think in the next, 2 to 3 years, we're going to see some interesting things happen in the mining world. And
let's get into that, actually. So this is a mining podcast, and we teach people how to build Bitcoin mines from start to finish on any scale. It's one of our specialties, and we love talking about Bitcoin mining. I'm a beginning Bitcoin miner, and Will is also beginning as well, but we have a lot of expertise on the team and all that kind of stuff. So I want to hear your general thoughts on Bitcoin mining and what your opinions are. What has led you down this rabbit hole, so to speak?
Well, let me preface this by saying I am not an expert by any means. Okay, I've been just using my brain, my knowledge of Bitcoin. Bob Burnett of Barefoot Mining is one of the original founders of Gateway Computers. When I met him in the space, I realized he was a voice of reason that we very, very much needed, and we still need in the space. And I don't think he gets heard enough, but this man has been through, the .com bubble and taking a company public. He was with Gateway and when they went public, and he knows what all of that is about. And what I started to learn was, I think the publicly traded miners have some issues, and they're fairly big ones. And I think they're being hidden really well. Partially because, I taught myself how to read SEC filings, and I started to go in. Yeah. I started to learn where to look for bullshit. Okay. When someone has a problem and they're trying to hide it, where do they hide that? And I learned that there is no one way to file an SEC filing. So all companies do, regardless of what you do, there's a lot of lawyers speak, there's a lot of CPAs speak. And obviously there's financials and things like that. It's kind of hard to fudge financials, but you can in the Bitcoin mining world because nobody knows how it works. Okay.
Can we back up for a second? I just want to, before we go diving into, public companies, SEC filings, and the large public miners, and I think that's going to be probably the meat of what we discuss in the show today. But I'm curious, what piqued your curiosity about the mining industry in general initially, that kind of led you to do the research in the first place?
It was Bob Burnett. It was, his knowledge and his experience, I realized, was something missing in our space. Okay. We've got the Bitcoin space, but we don't have a lot of boomers. We don't have a lot of people who have taken companies public. We don't have that. I don't see it anywhere. So when I met Bob, I realized this man has the logic, the skills, and the experience. And I also know for him, it's not about money. He doesn't need the money. Bitcoin is a passion project for him, and he sees it as money for 1,000 years and something that could actually be money for 1,000 years. He cares about that deeply. And because of that, I started to pay attention, and I realized, holy cow.
Is Bob
I see what's happening here?
So you enmeshed yourself, kind of threw yourself into the weeds with, Tone's chat rooms, and after following his content, you got to know him. and you spend time interacting with him. Did you kind of follow the same pattern with Bob? Did you get to know Bob? Did you what?
Yeah, I know him very well now. Well, what happened was, it was very interesting. Last year at BitBlock Boom, I've known Bitcoin Mechanic, who is one of the founders of Ocean. So I've known him for quite a while. And him and I both somehow, we stayed an extra day at BitBlock Boom, and I ended up hanging with him all day. And I learned about Ocean, and I learned about what they were planning to do. And then I learned Bob was involved. And Bob had done there's a couple of things Bob really does believe in. One of them is block space scarcity, which is a very interesting topic. It'll come to me. But when Bob got into he's on their board, and he was very instrumental in helping them get started, because he could see
Ocean, right?
Yes, because another issue is that our pools are very much not decentralized. Okay.
Yep.
The mining pool system is really centralized, and it's centralized for the most part in China and via Bitmain. And so his theory on it was, we have to do what we can do to start we have to start spreading things out. And I know that during the time of like the block size wars, there were situations where one pool would get so much and they would actually move pools. Well, people don't do that now. Okay. We also didn't have these giant publicly traded companies. And if you don't mind, I would love to tell you guys the rabbit, horses, and elephants story.
I love this story. Yeah. Please do. Please do.
Just to tee it up real quick. So, and I've heard this just recently because Mel and I have spoken earlier this week regarding something else, but this is kind of a mental model for a way to think about the mining industry's changing landscape. And so, you got thrust into the interest of trying to understand the mining industry on a deep level. It led you to research all these publicly traded mining companies' SEC filings and see what you could learn there. And then now here is this really cool mental model. I think that you've, I don't know if it's yours or if it's something you and a group have developed together, or Bob Burnett. So yeah,
this
okay.
This is Bob Burnett. And so Bob, I learned from him about Core Scientific. And basically Core Scientific, went public and bankrupt in the same year. And I started to look into that. And I thought that was a fascinating story. And this is when I learned from Bob the rabbits, horses, and elephants. So here we go. Pretend that you are walking out your back door and you live on a big old farm, and there's hills everywhere with green grass. And as far as you can see, there are white rabbits everywhere. They're covering your grass. So you grab your gun and you think, all right, I'm going to shoot a couple of these things. I'm going to get them out of here and, scare them away so I get my lawn back. So you fire off a couple of shots. You may hit a few, but they go away and they regroup very quickly, and maybe they just do it someplace else. Okay. But they're fine. So horses, wild horses, same story. You look out your back window or you look out your back door, and your entire, yard and hills above are all covered in horses, and they're everywhere, and they're eating your grass. They're, doing everything. And you think, all right, that's it. I'm going to get rid of these guys. So you fire off a couple of shots. Now, here you may hit a few more, but they are going to group and they're going to run away, and they're going to pick up again very quickly. And they're out of your yard. Last scenario is look out your back door and it's full of elephants, and that's all you see. Elephants, elephants, elephants. So you get out your gun and you're going to hit them all. You're going to shoot every single one of them. because they're not fast, they're slow, they are not going to move and be able to regroup, and by the time you're done, you're going to have killed them all, and they're done. All right? So this made me start to really think about Bitcoin mining and realize that who's the target? Like, let's say if the government would love to shut down mining, well, who's going to be the target? It's the elephants. Exactly. So this is, to me, is common sense. Like, everybody's just, stop and think about this. This is common sense. The horses, now they can, like, for example, Barefoot Mining, who I mine with, my miners are hosted with Barefoot Mining, so are Tones, and they have it set up so that they can pick up and move and restart someplace within 48 hours. So if there was some kind of, governmental or statewide banning or something like that, they could pick up and move very easily. But that's not going to happen with these big pubcos. All right. If the state of Texas decided they didn't want Bitcoin mining anymore, bye. That's a huge, huge piece. And part of what Bitcoin is supposed to be is decentralized. So the miners and the mining pools are kind of wrecking that.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. I think that's something people don't really consider that much is, like it's really cool to build up this giant data center dedicated solely to mining Bitcoin, as massive as they can be, having multiples of them in different states. We think that's, a good thing. And it probably is a good thing to have all that in the United States, where ostensibly, more liberties and freedoms that are protected by law than other nations, right? You can argue with that, but you're right. Like,
this is where you do it because there are legalities that usually last for a certain amount of time, and before something changes, there's going to be an election or there's going to be a vote. So you're going to see that coming where you're not going to see that coming in Paraguay.
Yeah, and Bitcoin miners are kind of energy buyers of last resort. And I don't, you hear that in literature, you hear it on television interviews with, personalities and people with public profiles that get interviewed on Fox Business or CNBC and whatnot. But that is a key concept to really understand, the energy buyer of last resort, meaning they'll buy energy on the fringes, they'll buy wasted energy, they'll locate stranded energy and have the capacities to kind of, for lack of a better term, harvest or exploit that stranded and wasted energy, which is a net good in general. You don't want waste and stranded energy doing nothing. And there's certain reasons that certain parts of the world have a stranded energy resource because it's hard to build a city there. It's hard to build transportation to that location and various other things. And it probably is in a climate where it's just not conducive. There's nothing else going on there that would allow some kind of small town or city to grow up around it. But Bitcoin miners can be very mobile and move to those places. It's
but
easy.
Can the publicly traded miners do that?
Yeah, go on.
They really can't. When you start to look at the costs that are involved with doing some of that stuff, if you're a rabbit or a horse, you're going to be able to do that in a much faster and more efficient way than the elephants. The elephants are going to be happier all being in one place. You put your staff, it just lowers your costs. And unfortunately, if you are a publicly traded company, your values and your, oh boy, what's the word I'm looking for? Your dedication is to your investors. Your dedication is not to Bitcoin. Your obligation is to your investors. And if miners are basically the protectors of the Bitcoin core, the core layer of Bitcoin, that's not their priority. Their priority is money for their investors.
Yeah, it's kind of a push-pull situation, right? It starts out like, why does someone get into mining? Why does anyone start a business around Bitcoin mining? Because they want to support the network and they think there's some value in it for them. But then you go public and you have these, maybe not always competing incentives, but certainly at times, and depending on the market cycle, where we are in the business cycle of Bitcoin or the macro business cycle, you might have competing incentives between, like you said, the stakeholders of the public companies and the network's needs itself.
Right. And as far as I can tell, I'm gonna go ahead and give CleanSpark, while we talk about this. CleanSpark is the one at this moment, in my mind, the one public company who's really trying to do this right. Their reports to the SEC make sense. And then when they are called out about something that doesn't make sense, they fix it. And they try to be as transparent as they can. All right. So they're the one pubco that I'm going to say is probably the leader and the kind of the star of the rest of them. And it is because they're trying very hard. I happen to know some of the guys. I know the CTO, and, they care about Bitcoin. Now, I don't know if they've gotten to the point yet where I don't think their investors are complaining either. So this is a good thing. But, sorry, I had to veer off to CleanSpark for a second, and then I lost my next train of thought. Well, I just wanted to say that they look good and they try really hard. And based on everything I've seen, they're trying to go down the right path. My issue is I'm not sure there is a path for any gigantic miner like this.
Let's talk about that real quick. So I know, I was fascinated in our conversation earlier last week when you talked about how you've dove into these SEC filings for all of these publicly traded miners, or I believe close to all of them. And you've thoroughly read through these documents, and I'm sure you learned a lot. And so I guess what compelled you to, first of all, choose that line of research, the public company's filings, and then tell us what you found.
Well, what compelled me was that's where they are supposed to be giving us their reports about what's happening. All right. And I did some research, all right, if you're a company and you're trying to fake it and you're not doing well, where are you going to hide it? And so I learned about that. And I also learned that nobody understands how Bitcoin mining works. Okay. So it's pretty easy to shake things up unless you're being called out on it. And for a very long time, they were not being called out on it. It was just their reports were almost nonsensical at times. And, the SEC, some of them, one of the companies who shall remain nameless was filing updates with the FTC using memes and using posts from Twitter. Literally taking screenshots and submitting them. And so you would open the 6K and it was a Game of Thrones meme that said something made no sense whatsoever. And so this is the weird kind of stuff that I started to see. And I thought, what the hell is going on here?
I think the audience would be particularly interested in, maybe you don't have to name any names, but can you talk about some specific things that you uncovered that appeared to be ways that public companies might hide, various things regarding their financials, or what sort of tricks or strategies they might be using that, who knows, could indicate that they're maybe operating in that fashion that's more closely aligned with their shareholders rather than the Bitcoin network, which again is a tough quandary to be in. You do need to address your shareholders' needs and concerns and demands. But yeah, without being specific, tell us some of the specific ways, or without naming anybody, I should say, tell us some of these kinds of these red flags that went up for you when you read some of these different companies' filings?
Well, okay, so the one thing I learned, and I started, like, when I first saw this with one company, I went and looked at others. Their C-team compensation is absurd. Like, in regards to what their profits in a year would be or what they bring in a year, the compensation is insane. It doesn't line up to what the companies bring in. So right there tells me that where are your priorities going to be? And the other
that before you move on to the second one, I'm just curious, is it possible that they're hiding how much they're making? I mean, to the downside, right? So like it's not that they're not making enough, which by your calculations with the public information, you just said they pay their executives more than they should be making, Bitcoin revenue in a year. But is it possible they're somehow in a hidden way making much more Bitcoin in a year that might support such salaries, but they're being quiet about how much they're making?
Can't see it. It just doesn't add up. And like their compensation is based on things that are absurd, like making it into the Russell 200, or I don't even remember what number it is. But like one of the companies, their compensation is based on meeting that kind of metric. And I don't see that as being the kind of metric that Bitcoin, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, trying to get a certain valuation or status for your public company doesn't necessarily directly support the Bitcoin network. I can see what you're getting at there. When you were about to share a second red flag when I cut you off.
That's okay. There's actually, I think there might be three. I lost one, but I have another. One of them, oh God. They use their stock as an ATM. So most of them have, in fact, all of them have at least, I'm going to be really conservative here and say at least twice in the past 18 months, every one of them has diluted their stock. They've gone in and they use their stock as an ATM. And it is, in my belief, is that they do not have access to capital. And so they're using this as capital. And there's very few people want to invest in Bitcoin mining because, again, they don't understand it, or I don't know what the hell. But it seems like they get investors on the private side. But if you want to get to a certain level, they, I believe, are going public for the money.
Mm-hmm.
Just for the cash and just for,
once you have stock that's publicly traded, it's kind of another financial instrument in your business's treasury, and you can use it as a strategy. And of course, maybe based on the timing and shrewdness of how you use that as a financial tool for your business, you might be just fine doing that. But certainly it's, common for companies who use that strategy to get themselves into trouble, depending on what the market is doing and how the stock is trading.
Looking at how Bitcoin, the price has doubled, okay, in what's happening with their prices. I mean, the stocks are not doing, and this isn't to say that when the price of Bitcoin goes up, which we know it will, that there will not be some price bumps there. But it is of my belief that if we don't get to a certain point for a significant amount of time, there's going to be trouble.
In terms of Bitcoin price?
In terms of Bitcoin miners. If we don't get to a price of like 125 and it's a sustained 125, we're going to have problems. And I believe, this was, I think, what I was going to say, I believe this all stems from the China mining ban. It started there. The companies... Oh, and another thing to keep in mind is at the last halving, we didn't have public companies like this, of this size and this many. So the China mining ban happened, and it was Christmas for the miners. You know, it was just money, money, money coming in. Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. So I believe that when that happened, it set off, and this was also happening at the height of the last bull run. So they began to get that more feeling. And so they started to buy up machines. You know, it's like as opposed to really tailoring to what they already had, they started to build up. And then when they built up, and while they were paying out the wazoo for mining, machines, servers, I believe there are miners sitting in closets in places that are not plugged in. I believe a lot of money was spent on this stuff, and then all of a sudden the market crashed. So now what happens? The market crashes, and if you're not ready for that, well, now you're just going to be skating on this thin ice, hoping that things come back around. And if that's what you did. Now, there are some companies like CleanSpark that I don't believe did that, and they used the bottom of the bear market to build. Okay. And if you did that, you're probably in better shape right now. But if you didn't do that, coming down, it's like, it's a race. It's a race against time and price.
Yeah. So,
and about the only thing that
China
can save some of them, I'm not saying.
Yeah. So China mining ban came, and they made these Chinese miners, they needed to liquidate immediately because there was a big actual government crackdown. I mean, I've been in the space long enough. There's been like 11 or 20 or something crazy China bans of various types. But this one was the first like real one, and it's definitely impacted hash rate. Yeah. So hash rate goes down by like 50% globally. And these guys, this is at the height of the bull market. We know that mining hardware appreciates as the price of Bitcoin gets into that elbow hockey stick, parabolic sort of trend. And so they're liquidating all this hardware at high prices, inflated prices. And of course, the publicly traded miners that exist at the time see themselves, I think correctly, as, in the best position to buy that liquidated equipment. And so they're thinking we should just grab it because, again, this is a very competitive industry, very cutthroat. So they go after all this hardware at inflated prices. And I think that's what you're saying is like now probably collecting dust, is they maybe overextended themselves during that period as a move to be more competitive, and it blew up in their face because of all of the shenanigans with regard to the fraud, the leverage, and the crazy trading environment that happened during this last cycle where, if you look at the Bitcoin chart, it looks like two camel humps. So the first camel hump right at the top of that is right when the Chinese mining ban hit. And then, of course, we go down to like, low 30K or high 20K. And then we go back up in kind of what I would call like an artificial that's my theory anyways. It was a kind of artificially pushed or inflated way to get everyone out of trouble after the Chinese mining ban and the truncated bull run, because we probably should have kept going were it not for the China mining ban and also the fraud and leverage in the system.
Yeah.
So pick up there if you don't mind.
Okay, so part of that competitiveness that you mentioned, like, for example, let's use Core Scientific, the ones who went public and went bankrupt in the same year. They had, it appears, had a strong plan to make sure that nobody else could get new mining equipment. So they spent zillions of dollars sucking up everything that was available from Bitmain so others could not get anything. And this was their this affected everybody around them, but at the same time, it put them down as well. And again, it's just a lot of crazy nonsense that went along with it. And they did not, again, it was about them and it was about their shareholders. It was not about Bitcoin. It was not about, protecting the core of Bitcoin. It's about them and money.
Trying to save their companies at that point, probably.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And like, for example, last week, Wolf did it. They used their stock as an ATM, but right before they did it, all of their C team took their share. And then they did it. So it's like, this is happening in so many of these companies. And like I said, no one's paying attention. You go to the mining guy and his mining group. I mean, it's just like, it's a lot of cheerleaders for certain. It's like rooting for your favorite sports team while no one looks at the internal anything about how it's working. The other thing you may have noticed, or maybe you subconsciously hadn't noticed, but whenever they release a report of any kind, there's also a press release that gets released with it. And in that press release, it will say something along the lines of, in July of 2026, we will have 400 million in X, it's some absurd number. Like, this is what's going to happen. There's never been, in the past year, I haven't seen a press release that says, hey, we've acquired this spot, we're actually working, everything's up and running, so we have increased our hash by, X amount by doing this. What they're doing instead is the whole promise of what's happening down the line. And no one seems to be questioning that either.
Yeah, these projections are kind of, it's part and parcel of running these types of companies, is to make these kinds of projections and, let your shareholders know what you're working towards. But
right. But they're not telling them what's really happening. They're telling them what they're working towards so that more people will buy their stock. And, is this protecting Bitcoin in any way? Is this helping Bitcoin in any way?
It could be introducing vulnerabilities among some of these extremely large miners, which would make it, concerning vulnerability. And so, mining stocks, Bitcoin's publicly traded mining companies, their share prices usually lag and underperform Bitcoin. So they don't go up right when Bitcoin starts to increase, they lag. And then they also don't perform as well as Bitcoin itself. And of course, a lot of prognosticators and analysts think of the public traded mining companies as a good proxy for the Bitcoin price, as a good way to get exposure to Bitcoin. And it is some exposure to Bitcoin, but it's not direct. It's not, like I said, historically they underperform. And so that can kind of add to this recipe of potential disaster that you're kind of outlining. So how does that bring us back to the rabbits, horses, and elephants?
Well, I mean, we're talking about the elephants and what is making them slower and what is making it harder for them. There's, let's see, I just had another thought and it left my mind. Well, I mean, in any elephant situation, there's no winning. You can't win that. Okay. And that is who the elephants are. I don't believe that Bitcoin mining and everything that goes with it was ever intended for that kind of mining situation. I don't, when I told you earlier that there'd only been two things I could see down the line that made perfect sense to me. Bitcoin was one, selling online was one. I can't see a mining situation down the line that works the way it's working right now. Okay. If we go to 125 and we're sustained at 125 in the next couple of months, then I'm wrong. And they're going to be okay. Unless they continue to spend a ridiculous amount of money. And I mean, the other thing I think is interesting that no one seems to notice when I go into these Bitcoin mining groups is people talk about, here's how much it costs per Bitcoin. Well, it is a terrible metric because most of them are just saying, well, we're only paying 4 cents and this and this and that. But what about your costs? What about your overhead? The overhead is so high, and that every day goes into the price. And when it's all said and done, there's, especially today, I mean, think about it. We've cut their revenue in half, literally, and had that first week of big fees and such continued on. Maybe that would have been different. But we did have that 1 week that I think will kind of help those who got a piece of that. But is that coming back? We don't know. We don't even know if we want.
We've seen, so the largest attack surface for publicly traded mining companies is probably a regulatory attack. And we've seen one of these on massive scale already in China 3-ish years ago. And most of the fallout from that was a lot of reshoring on to U.S. soil of these, mining farms. A lot of partnerships built up by the Chinese miners who had to shut down and try to move their business or sell off their business. And that mostly came to the U.S. So there is still, of course, regulatory risks to Bitcoin across a number of fronts, including mining. And we've seen this current administration in the U.S. be relatively hostile to Bitcoin and the crypto industry as a whole. And certainly they've even shown lately that they'll go after miners. There's the story about the government land in Wyoming, and there was a Bitcoin mining business that was going to be too close to this government land, I believe a military base. And so administration unilaterally said, I don't know if it was an executive order, but it was definitely the White House that said, you business owner who wants to mine Bitcoin next to our property, you cannot mine Bitcoin there because of national security. It's too close to this base, whatever. So they have even shown that they're willing to kind of go after businesses like this directly. So the risk is there. You're right. The risk is real for some of these publicly traded U.S. domiciled miners to have this regulatory thing.
If you were part of this government that told you, nah, we got to get rid of some of these guys, where's the first place you're going?
Elephants,
but where? Texas. Because Texas is where all the hash is. And again, centralized. Okay. Our mining world is way more centralized than it should be. If there was more rabbits and horses, this would be spread out in a lot more different places instead of all in Texas.
Okay. Let's get to that. So I want to talk about the rabbits. So the way that I see the rabbits would be home miners, because they're the ones, they're the smallest of the rabbits. And so what does it look like in the future for, home miners being the rabbits and heating their houses with miners? Because that's the only type of mining that I do. I only do home heat mining and applications where I can integrate an ASIC into a heating element or something like that. So obviously those are the rabbits, and Bob Burnett would be a horse, type of situation.
Sure.
What are the implications of that? What does that look like going into the future? How do we get more home miners to mine at home?
Well, right now, again, it depends on your costs. It depends on, how much is your electricity. And if you can't make enough Bitcoin to pay for that electricity at the very least, well, you're not going to do it. And right now, the competition for these 3.125 Bitcoin that come every block is so intense that, right now, I'm going to give it personally, me, for being a miner with 5 rigs, I'm giving it and I'm okay. All right. I'm even. All right. And that means I'm I haven't paid for my electricity yet, but I've paid for my rigs with what I've mined. But now I have to pay back the last like 6 or 7 months of electricity bills before I am actually caught up in making Bitcoin. All right. One of the reasons I wanted to do that was so that I could learn about it. And the other reason I wanted to do it was to support Ocean because of the, issues that I believe, again, the extremely centralized manner of Bitcoin pools, the mining pools.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to understand it. I wanted to help. Tone was the same way. He also went in with barefoot mining and Ocean in an effort to try to do that. And like there's so many interesting, bizarre things about that too. Bob, for example, he's got rigs hooked up to every single mining company or pool. So he's keeping track of what is coming out of every pool. So far, Ocean is winning like by a landslide in terms of profits. And, Ocean is just splitting with you. So you don't get paid until you get a block, and then everyone gets paid. In the pubcos, from what I understand, the majority of them are using Foundry. We're not exactly sure why, but I'm sure there's reasons. I mean, with all of the governmental things that have been happening, my guess is that, and it's just a pure guess, Foundry made it easy for them to file their paperwork with the government and the IRS. Maybe they've worked with the IRS, and so it's the pool that the government maybe likes and trusts their paperwork, and so that's kind of why everybody's gone in that direction. But we're also seeing things that make it look like the pools are skimming off the top. All right, so here's my bottom line. For an industry that is a verified, don't trust, this is an entire section of the industry that no one's paying attention to. And it is just trusting it inexplicably with no questions asked.
Yeah,
and
that's the difference between a lot of these pools and Ocean. I was surprised to hear you say that as Bob is tracking the pools and how they pay out to him, just as I think his own little way of analyzing what's going on, I'm surprised to learn that Ocean is in the lead on that in his little experiment, right? Because
it's the only one that's transparent.
That's interesting, because obviously Ocean was, if you're following Ocean's pool, you understand that, they don't win as many blocks maybe as some of the other hash rate pools out there. And but when they do, they share everything with its members of the pool. And whereas the other guys, they do an average, right? So like they expect to hit so many blocks, and so they're paying you out on an average minus the pool fee. And so it's interesting. It sounds like you and Bob have come across this phenomenon where maybe they're giving you even less than the average minus the pool fee. And maybe, and now you're kind of seeing it because you're a member of all these pools and analyzing it, which I think is fascinating. I wouldn't have expected that Ocean is in the lead.
Yeah. And I think it's fascinating too, how much, for lack of a better word, how much shit they got when they started this pool. And why? It's a transparent, open, verifiable mining pool. And with what we're making now with very little hash rate flowing in, all you've got to do is double the hash and you're going to double the blocks and on and on. So it's like when they've talked to the publicly traded companies, though, the word on the street is we can't do it. And they don't. And I'm not saying that everybody is slimy and everybody's wrong, but they have now gotten into a rhythm or a groove where their regulatory departments and things like that, they won't let them switch. they won't let them move. And because I'm just assuming, again, that it has to do with how things are reported. And, you know, it seems like transparency in this would be so simple. I mean, you know, if you're running a certain amount of machines, what you're contributing, and that should be a pretty easy math problem. Except in these pools, you have no idea what your percentage in the pool actually is. So you don't know what kind of payout you're getting. And I just think there's some kind of money blindness in that steady paycheck they're getting.
Yeah, there's always trade-offs. This is the biggest lesson of my 11 years in the spaces. There's always trade-offs, right? If you think you're getting something, you're giving up something else. You need to be aware of trade-offs. You're never going to, a lot of people struggle with this concept these days. I have noticed they just think they can have it all or something. Maybe it's an entitlement thing. I don't know. But you need to be aware there are trade-offs. If you are in any negotiations or you're trying to, navigate some space, you got to be aware of those trade-offs. And so, we should also be wary anytime, as Bitcoiners in general, we should be wary anytime there is less or no transparency than there probably should be. I mean, the beauty of this network, one of the things that draws so many people to it is that it's fully transparent and self-verifiable. Run a node, you can verify everything on the network yourself, and it's the ledger is completely
unless we're looking into mining.
Right, and then there are these areas that you kind of identified where the transparency is not so great, or it's kind of being minimized or, diminished. So that presents risks, right? Risks you need to be aware of, and I think that's kind of the core message here from you, Mel, is there are risks people aren't paying attention to in this space, and we should dig deeper into them and understand what's going on here, because this cycle is seasonal, and you need to be able to navigate it well if you want to sustain through the highs and lows and survive.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin mining is a game of survival for sure.
I mean, right now I'm your average person. I mean, remember, my family in 2008, we lost literally everything, including our house. And I have to be able to pay my electric bill, all right, which is not cheap for 5 rigs. It's about $1,000 a month. So far, I have been able to keep up with that and pay that. But when I can't and I have to shut it down, because I'm not taking the FPPS payment from anybody. You know what I mean? I'm not going to take that steady paycheck because I think it's bullshit. And I'll just shut down for a while if I have to. But if I do that, imagine how many other rabbits have to do that. And so again, it just puts the power in the hands of the big guys. So it's complex, and
yeah, and this is one of the reasons I think, Satoshi designed the system in this way that it would ultimately be like whack-a-mole. And once enough nodes, back in his day, they were all mining nodes, right? So once enough nodes had propagated the network, it would eventually be a game of whack-a-mole until everybody starts being a fan or supportive of the Bitcoin network in some way. Everybody, including large corporations, government institutions, and so on and so on. So that's kind of the game theory of Bitcoin playing out eventually, right? And so this game of whack-a-mole, where, some miners over here got shut down because this or that government or some, mafia or something shut it down, it can just pop up somewhere else. It might be very painful and difficult for those that were made to shut down. Maybe they can migrate, or maybe they just go poof. But then another enterprising, group or individual will spin up a mine somewhere else, and so it's this constant game of whack-a-mole that obviously elephants are not very suited for. They're not very well suited for this. So that's, I think, a really important key takeaway is that, if you can be nimble and migrate relatively easily, then you're going to probably have a better chance at winning. And, the regulatory crackdown isn't the only risk that forces migration or forces this whack-a-mole thing to play out. There could be many other reasons why miners have to move abruptly. But the ones that are able to do so, the ones that, again, are using containers, are using stranded or wasted energy, they're going to be the easiest to move much more easily than someone who builds transformers and warehouses.
I would be curious. I don't even know, like how many is that? How many people are actually using stranded energy? And how many are just hooked into the ERCOT grid in Texas? So listen, with 2,200 electric companies in the United States, there is so much difficulty for them as well. Like just in order to come up with a good deal on electric, and that deal is not permanent. So it's just, there's so much complexity to it, to where the rabbits and the horses don't have to deal with that as much. And so that's why I'm just not sure I see the pubcos being able to win in this. And I'm not sure.
It should be very encouraging for people that we try to reach on this show, who are the horses and rabbits, or the aspiring rabbits and aspiring horses, because again, there's an opportunity for you. This is kind of the, goes against Go ahead.
We need you. And let's say, for the sake of argument, that, right now, just for fun, we could go for the next 6 months and stay in the exact same price range that we're in. And if that happens, I think they have to start shutting some things down. And if they do, for me, that's exciting, because that's more for me, and we could potentially be hitting more blocks as rabbits and horses, and it helps us stay in it. So,
yeah, it's important that we reach out to those people, and that we find more people that want to be the rabbits and the horses. And obviously the rabbits are going to grow into the horses, and we want to make sure that they don't become too large, that they become an elephant. So through your work with Unconfiscatable, how can you and how can we, reach more of those quote unquote rabbits, and, spread this word like, hey, let's start building and finding more ways to be nimble and agile and not get rug pulled by these giant mining pools and the giant mining pubcos?
Well, we have to talk about it. And I know everybody's afraid of the pubcos. Nobody wants to say the wrong thing. Nobody wants to get on the bad side of it. And, it's one of those things, like, again, back to this is a sports team and the cheerleaders are all for it. And you guys, can we stop for a second?
So, let's talk a little bit about how we can spread the word about, why we need to be more agile, more nimble, why we need to, like, why is it so important that over the next epoch, the next cycle, Bitcoin miners become smaller, more agile, more nimble? And how do we do that through your work at Unconfiscatable, through our work here on the podcast? And like, how do we reach people?
Well, I think one of the things we have to do is reach through people's dedication and love for Bitcoin, and seeing that if this is money for 1,000 years, there's a couple of things that we could be doing. One of them is everybody needs to run a node, and that's huge. And we don't talk about that very much anymore either. Running a node is the Runes guys, the guys who created Runes and the ordinals, and, we don't have to get into any of that and how we feel about it. But I will tell you, when I heard that over 1,000 supporters of Runes are now running Bitcoin nodes, I found that to be unbelievable. And I said, what are we doing? Are we suddenly running brand new 1,000 nodes? There are now 1,000 Bitcoiners running nodes, brand new nodes today? No. So what do we need? I'm with you. Like, how people need to know that If you can run a node, do it. You need to do it. If you can mine and afford to mine, we need that as well. And there could come a time where, again, legally, they could crack down on things, and it's the rabbits and the horses that keep things going. I don't think that this is a threat to Bitcoin in any way. You know, Bitcoin will do what Bitcoin does. However, I just feel like it's something kind of it's trusted, not verified. And, you know, we need to get back on the track of where we were in 2017, where we still had some independence as small miners and people running nodes. And like, just, we can't forget it now. You can't just let publicly traded companies take over and let everyone else do it. And I feel like that's where it's going right now.
Yeah, Bitcoin will survive, but how we're affected as Bitcoiners really matters, and we can't let them win. So it's important that we, like you said, run nodes, verify our transactions, verify our blocks, and, you know, really work together in this, you know.
Yeah, I mean, do you want the runes guys to like win the race and in who's running nodes in this business? I mean, that makes no sense to me. But that's what's happening.
I think, you know, things like Lightning, they may come and go. I mean, Lightning's still around, obviously, but it may not have had the impact that people promised it might in 2018, 2019, right? But that project got a ton of people tinkering and playing around. And of course, they had their own nodes, right? And then, you know, ordinals and runes come around, and a bunch of people who want to try and use the Bitcoin blockchain in these new ways had to spin up their own node in order to do it themselves. Maybe some of them are tinkerers, maybe some of them are, you know, scammers, whatever, but they're running nodes. So these different things have come along, inspiring people to run nodes. And I think your question's a really good one. Like, what do the more, you know, let's say, for lack of a better term, the more conservative approach to changes to Bitcoin's blockchain, those folks, what are they doing to incentivize people to run more nodes? You know, is it just a fear campaign, like they got to run nodes because the other guys are running nodes? Or is it something more useful? Like
whatever it takes, you know what I mean? Whatever it takes. It's like, we need to be, I just feel like the time is now. We don't have time to play games with this, or Bitcoin may not be what we think it could be. All right. This could just, it's like it's almost coming down to that letting everybody else deal with it thing. And you're just holding your Bitcoin and going, yeah, waiting for money price go up. And that may not happen if the community doesn't deeply get involved, quit arguing about everything, and get yourself a node.
I don't think Bitcoiners are ever going to quit arguing.
No, Bitcoin never stop arguing.
Like an hour, okay, and get yourself a node and get yourself lined up to help the community. And it's one of the biggest ways that we can do that. You know, nodes should also be like rabbits. Okay, it should not just be the miners running nodes. It should be the rabbits as well, and horses, and everybody.
Everybody on the Bitcoin network who's using the Bitcoin network to better their lives should be running a node. And I am guilty of this as well. I do not run a node, and I need to. And I know that it's actually not that difficult to get a basic node up and running. You just need an old laptop, and you need to download some software and run that software, and then you start tinkering and playing with it. So Our message to everyone listening, watching this podcast, and as we move forward, going, you know, you at your unconfiscatable conferences and everything like that, us at our conferences, you know, we need to spread that message. Like, run nodes, be agile.
Get someone who can say from point A to point Z, this is how you do it. This is how you set it up. Make it as simple as possible, and get everybody on board with it. Because I think miners kind of forgotten about that.
Yeah, home miners, or if you're aspiring to start mining, and let's say maybe you've ordered your first ASIC, but it's still en route and shipping to you or something, or maybe you haven't pulled the trigger and it's cost prohibitive right now to buy an expensive specialized computer just to do one thing, such as mine Bitcoin. And so you want to get to that point, but you're not there yet, but you still have this bug, this itch you need to scratch to tinker around with the Bitcoin network. Well, the best way to do it for just a couple $100, buy a little bit of equipment. There's so many great tutorials and guides. I'm sure we can put some in the show notes that we like, Trevor, in this episode, but just you can run a node. That's a great introduction to eventually figuring out how you want to mine Bitcoin from home.
Huge.
Yeah. So we are closing this episode out almost here. I've got 2 little questions we want to ask you, and then we're going to talk about our conference that we've got coming up in September. So what does Bitcoin mean to you, Mel?
Easy one. Hope.
I love that.
It's hope.
That's why. Why is Bitcoin hope?
It's hope for my future. It's hope for my kids. It's hope for my grandchildren. It's hope. It's hope that doesn't come with the US dollar.
I love that. The reason I love that is because that's what Bitcoin means to me as well. So my wife is pregnant with my son right now, and Bitcoin for me is hope that my son will be able to put value into this world, hold that value, and give it to his children. So I love that. I absolutely love that answer. And the last one, I think we kind of know a little bit. And obviously, if you'd had it back in 2008, maybe your life would have been a little bit different. But what has Bitcoin done for your life?
It's made me more clearer. Everything is clearer. I wish it became clear to me about how we don't teach anything about money in school, how we don't talk about money. And I'm not sure how we use that to turn that around. But that is one of the biggest things that changed for me, was realizing in 2017, I was, I owned my own business. I was a mom to 3 kids. I'm still a mom, but, my kids were a lot younger, and it was just a rat race, every day, just trying to get to the next paycheck to get things back on track. And I learned how to save. I learned how to do things that I had just never done before. And so, yeah, that's, there's so much to that, but that's a little bit of it right there.
I love that. I really do. And I think that's what draws a lot of people in is, you come for the money and you stay for the foundation, for the principles, and for the fundamentals. So awesome.
Yeah, and
well,
I'm an average person, I'm not Bitcoin wealthy. That $100 just made me stack more Bitcoin, but I'm stacking Bitcoin every day, and I am an average normal person who, I've owned my own business. I didn't have a 401k. I didn't have the things that come with that 9-to-5. And now I have some of those things, and I have them just because I discovered Bitcoin and it made me learn.
But you did it yourself. You didn't need the help of a boss or anything like that. You became your own boss and you did it yourself. You built it yourself, and it's not much. You're not gonna turn around 20 years from now and be a quad billionaire, but that's not what matters. Yeah. And for me, that's the money doesn't matter to me. It's what the money can buy, and Bitcoin allows you to look at your life and really trim all the fat, all the excess, all the waste, and narrow down, this is what I want, this is what I want to provide, and this is what I can do. So I
spend a lot less fiat on stupid stuff, I'll tell you that.
Right. Oh man, it's great. So the last thing is, Mel, we are giving out 2 free conference tickets to our conference in September 27th through the 29th. It is the mining conference. we would love to have you join us so that we can meet in person and, just kind of talk with you and all that stuff. So we're going to give you 2 free tickets to that. And yeah, absolutely. We appreciate you coming on today and sharing us sharing with us your story and, talking to us and all that stuff. So we'll make sure that happens. I'll share it with you in the Telegram chat. But so one of the tickets is for you. And if you need more tickets, let me know. I'll make sure that you get some. But we would like you to do a giveaway for the second ticket. We'd like you to do any of your meetups that you go to, Unconfiscatable, anything like that. There's details that we'll send that we don't need to talk about here, but that's basically what we would like. And it's a really fun experience.
Who wants to go with me? Huh?
Yeah, there you go. Come with Mel to the binding conference.
To the conference.
Yeah, maybe we can get Bob Burnett to come with us as well. That'd be fun.
Ooh, yeah, you need Bob.
Yeah,
you got to talk to Bob.
Yeah, we want to get Bob on the podcast, especially after the rabbits, horses, and elephants story. That's something we'd love him to expound upon. So, Will, do you have anything left to say? Or
I don't. I'm thrilled always to talk with Mel. I'm glad we got more of her time and got to record it. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Certainly food for thought, presents more theories about what might be going on in the mining landscape and how it's going to change in the future. So thank you so much, Mel.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, guys, this has been the Build a Mine podcast. This is episode 10. I forgot to say that at the very beginning, but we are officially 10 episodes in. So, it's been some work, but we thank you guys for being here. We thank you guys for watching. If you guys like this episode, please like, comment, subscribe. You can find us on Fountain, where you can send us sats and we can send you sats back. So let's all be part of the value for value model. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Take care.
Please note, the Build a Mine podcast provides information for general educational purposes only. This information should not be construed as legal, financial, or investment advice. We do not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information presented, and we encourage you to consult with a professional advisor, legal advisor, and/or financial advisor before making any financial decisions. The Build a Mine podcast and its affiliates are not responsible for any losses incurred as a result of using the information provided.